When it comes to adaptations, I evaluate them in the same way I would any other entry in the medium. A book adapted into a movie or TV show? Analyze the writing, the acting, the cinematography. A movie adapted into a video game? Examine the gameplay mechanics, the story, the visuals. But beyond these, there is one additional quality that adaptations must fulfill, and that is faithfulness. How accurately does the adaptation portray the source material? Does the story hit the same beats, include the same events, and resolve the same way? Are characters' personalities, relationships, arcs, and motivations preserved, even if specific scenes differ? Does the adaptation explore the same ideas and questions as the original, even through different means? More subjectively, does the adaptation feel like the source? These questions have answers, and those answers can be used to judge an adaptation the same way one would judge any other work in a medium. Now, perfect faithfulness is impossible. Switching mediums is a trade-off. You gain the strengths of the medium, but also its weaknesses. A book adapted into a movie will gain the visual element. You can now show and not just tell. But you often lose a lot of detail. Narration, character thoughts, and exposition are frequently sacrificed to fit into the film and its limited runtime. A book can go on and be put down and finished later, while most films are meant to be watched in a single sitting. These are trade-offs that come with the territory. An adaptation will never be perfectly faithful, and I wouldn't expect it to be. But faithfulness matters. If an adaptation is not faithful to the source material, why engage with it? Why make it? What is it offering beyond familiar iconography? At best, an unfaithful adaptation is a hollow thing, devoid of the substance that made the original work worth adapting. At worst, it raises questions about intent. Was the goal ever to bring this world to a new audience while respecting the one that already loves it? Or to simply borrow a known name and the goodwill and popularity attached to it? And that brings us to the Fallout TV show. With 2 seasons done and a third on the way, the show presents itself as an adaptation of the Fallout game series, one that is supposedly set in the same canon as the games. The show itself is awful, the writing is weak, and no amount of game references can save it. This video will focus primarily on the second season, though the first is far from innocent. And while I will comment on the writing throughout, the question I want to examine is more specific. How faithful is the show? Does it accurately portray the source material? Does it feel like Fallout? No, it does not. The Fallout show is not a faithful adaptation of the games. It shows little regard for pre-established characters and events from the games, taking familiar iconography and using it for easy reference points while hollowing out the substance beneath it, and replacing it with its own material regardless of whether that material fits the world. Rather than using the Fallout universe as a foundation to build its story, it opts to instead use it as a backdrop and little else. It makes changes to the lore and history of the world so severe and so careless that they cannot be explained as creative reinterpretation, only as malice or incompetence, and a total failure to understand and respect what Fallout is. A key part of adaptation faithfulness is how it treats the characters and events of the source material. An adaptation is entering an already established world, one with a set history, characters with defined personalities and beliefs, and rules about what can and cannot happen within it. Any new work set in the world has to operate within those rules if it wants to remain faithful. If a writer wants to do something that goes against those rules, they have to consider how it affects not just their story, but the integrity of the world at large. If they want to use a character from the source, they should think about how that character would actually behave and whether having them in a given situation makes any sense at all. How does the Fallout show handle this? Well, it barely cares. The general rule seems to be that when you see something from the games, it will look like that thing and share its name, and that's about it. Characters, factions, locations, events, all recognizable on the surface and hollow underneath. Characters' motivations and personalities bear little resemblance to the games. Faction ideologies shift and contradict what came before. Events have their chronology warped or are ignored entirely. Everything is what the writers needed to be in the moment, wearing the skin of the source material to deliver a story that has nothing to do with it. One of the best examples of this is the portrayal of Mr. House. You learn a lot about Robert House in New Vegas. The man himself will willingly explain and exposit much about his beliefs, actions, and plans. He is a calculating man, basing his actions on probability and not wanting to leave things to chance. He nearly predicted the end of the world to the day. and realizing that war was inevitable, built a defense system that spared Vegas much of the destruction that rained down on the rest of the nation. His predictive capability allows him to know how people will react and when to use the carrot or the stick to get them to do what he wants. It's this same calculating nature that leads him into courting a wildcard like the Courier to his side. Now let's look at how the show's portrayal of House is in comparison. In the first season, House is present at the meeting of all the big evil companies where they discuss engineering the end of the world. While the group discusses their evil plans, House says the baffling line that,
"There's a lot of earning potential with the end of the world."
This is a bizarre line coming from a man who spent a significant amount of time and money preparing his defense system to protect Vegas from the end of the world. He thought a nuclear war was inevitable, just a matter of time. He didn't want to instigate one. Let's say that he's speaking matter-of-factly, that the panic of a potential nuclear war would be a good way to scare people into spending. Spending on vault space, on supplies, etc. That would make this line not as terrible, but the follow-up and reply confirm its out-of-characterness. House states that this is a lot of money to risk on a hypothetical, and asks how results can be guaranteed. The evil Vault Tech lady replies that they'll drop the bomb themselves. The show gives House no visible reaction to this, and the audience is left to assume that he found this acceptable. So now Mr. House is fine with nuking the world. Okay, sure. Of course, this entire meeting is nonsense. Why would all the big rich business people think that ending the world would make them richer? Did the writers even think for a second on how that doesn't make a single bit of sense? All your customers are dead and money is worthless. The second season tries to retcon this and make the scene in House look less ridiculous. The House at the meeting was actually a body double rather than the real Robert House.
How long have you been pretending to be this guy?
About 10 years.
And the Enclave was pulling the strings behind the curtain. The writers realized that this scene was indefensible, and so they went back and changed the context behind it. Season 2's portrayal of House only gets worse. At the start of the first episode of the second season, we get a taste of how the show handles Mr. House. A group of construction workers in a bar are venting their frustration over robots taking their job while the body double House speaks on TV. In the back of the bar sits the actual Robert House. He gets their attention with a speech about dollars equaling votes, then asks one of the workers his profession before saying, "Ah, so you must use the H&H nail gun," going on to praise its efficiency over a hammer before concluding with,
Why, I thought you'd be grateful.
The problem with this is that House doesn't own H&H tools. His half-brother Anthony does, the same brother who cheated Robert out of his inheritance of the company on their father's death. House founded and owns Robco Industries. This is a relatively minor detail, but it speaks to the broader carelessness at work. The writers apparently didn't check the wiki, let alone play the game. When the season was airing, some viewers speculated that this was actually Anthony House rather than Robert, and that explained the out-of-character behavior. It was wishful thinking. This is meant to be the real Mr. House. The workers take House out behind the bar, where he offers them $31 million if they let him put a small gizmo on the back of their necks. One of the workers points out that they could just beat him up and take the money, which is a great point. Why the hell is House doing this himself? The show established that House uses a body double for public appearances, yet here he is wandering alone into an alleyway with hostile strangers to personally test experimental technology on them? He doesn't have a bodyguard or security, a manservant. These men could have beaten him to death on the spot. This version of House is significantly less intelligent than the one in the games. The one worker grabs House and conveniently turns his head and exposes his neck, despite House having just explained that he wanted to place something on his neck. House does exactly that.
Then we'll take his money. These fucking rich people will suffer.
While the other two workers stand and do nothing. The gizmo is revealed to be a mind control chip. House orders the now controlled worker to kill his friends, which he does before his head explodes, with House laughing as he picks up the gore-covered chip off the ground. So, the show's Mr. House is now manufacturing and personally field testing mind control chips on random people in back alleys. The same Mr. House who, if you side with Caesar in New Vegas, decries you for making slavery the future of mankind. Later in the season, Hank makes this explicit, stating that
Robert House wanted to turn human beings into machines, erase their memories, make them suggestible enough to follow his orders.
This is a total character assassination, and shows a massive misunderstanding of what makes House an interesting character. His entire philosophy is built on the prediction and control through incentive and consequence. The carrot and the stick. He doesn't need to control people's minds because he understands how people think well enough to make them do what he wants of their own volition. House wanting to mind control people is the exact opposite of this. It replaces his calculating understanding of human behavior with crude brute force. None of this exists in New Vegas. None of it follows from anything established about the character. The writers used House as a skin suit, kept the name, kept the general look, and replaced everything underneath with whatever they needed him to be for their plot. This isn't Mr. House. This is Mr. Home. Monsieur Maison. The Platinum Chip is another part of House's story that the show discards in favor of its own invention. In New Vegas, the Platinum Chip is what sets the entire game in motion. Benny stealing it from the courier is the inciting incident. It's more than a plot device, though. The Platinum Chip was the key to Mr. House's plans for Vegas. The chip contains upgrades for the Lucky 38 systems, including the Securitron's Mark II operating systems. Getting the chip to House and then to the Securitron vault under the fort is central to his plan to secure control over the Mojave. The show doesn't mention the Platinum Chip. In its place, the cold fusion diode from the first season becomes the object House needs to fulfill his plans. It will somehow allow him to live forever in roboticized, non-biological form. This is yet another break from the games. In New Vegas, House is explicit that he remains flesh and blood, preserved in a stasis pod, very much still a human being. The show turns him into something different without explanation or apparent reason. Why make this change? What was wrong with the stasis pod? What does reframing House as a digital consciousness add to the story that couldn't have been achieved while remaining faithful to the source? The change serves no narrative purpose, introduces a contradiction with established lore, and creates exactly the kind of continuity nightmare that makes life hell for the poor souls maintaining the Fallout wikis. It's a change made for its own sake. This is how the show handles adapting a single character from the games. Terribly. House is a mess, barely related to his game counterpart. His personality hollowed out and his purpose replaced with something bizarre and unrecognizable. So you can only imagine how bad it gets when they adapt an entire faction. Let's look at the most prevalent faction in the show, the Brotherhood of Steel. Of all the factions in Fallout, the Brotherhood is the most varied in portrayal across the games. The nature of the Brotherhood, made up of distinct chapters spread across the breadth of the United States, allows for many of them to develop their own distinct flavor. With how difficult it is to travel long distances in post-war America, each chapter ends up isolated from the others. Combined with the challenge of long-range communication, many chapters end up with their own ideology that can differ greatly from the orthodoxy of the founding chapter. While many chapters might nominally be under the influence or control of the Lost Hills chapter, their actual influence is basically non-existent. The best example of this is the contrast between the West Coast and East Coast Brotherhoods. The Capital Brotherhood tried their hand at nation building in the ruins of DC, an objective far outside what the West Coast would consider the mission of the Brotherhood of Steel. I say this to make it clear that I'm not opposed to a Brotherhood chapter being portrayed differently. I like the idea of using a familiar faction in different ways across different games, as long as it doesn't contradict or ignore existing lore. The main Brotherhood chapter the show focuses on is one of its own invention, the Knights of San Fernando, led by Elder Cleric Quintus. The chapter has a religious bent not seen in any other chapter. Quintus frames their mission in explicitly holy terms, invoking God and recasting Roger Maxon's founding of the Brotherhood as a choice between serving his God or his government, which immediately makes me ask, where is the Lost Hills chapter? Like the Platinum Chip, the founding chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel simply isn't mentioned. The chapter that helped the Vault Dweller defeat the Master and his Unity is ignored as if it didn't exist. Maybe the audience is supposed to assume Quintus's chapter is the same one, or more likely the writers didn't care to consider them at all. The religious framing is also inconsistent. Quintus speaks with fervor, but no one else in the chapter seems to share this level of zeal. The show also attempts to pass off the invented cleric rank as something common across all Brotherhood chapters, with the Knights simply having more of them, despite no Brotherhood chapter in any game having a cleric before the show made it up. The Knights also have an airship like the Pridwin of the Commonwealth chapter. Another direct contradiction of the games. Fallout 4 explains that the Pridwin is unique, Built from scrap at Adams Air Force Base, the show not only ignores this by giving another chapter an identical vessel, but makes the contradiction worse by depicting the same class of airship floating over the LA coast in a pre-war flashback. So now this unique vessel doesn't just exist twice, it existed before the war entirely. There's also a small moment that stuck with me. When the Knights arrive at Area 51, they uncover a pristine pre-war car. For a faction whose entire mission revolves around preserving technology, this should be a significant find. The show then cuts to them using it for target practice and destroying it, the car exploding into a fireball. Again, it's the little things in addition to the big ones that show how these writers do not give a shit about the source material. In the second season, Quintus calls a conclave of Brotherhood chapters to meet. The assembled chapters are all newly invented for the show: the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Coronado chapters. Now you might think that a small cadre of representatives from each chapter would show up, but no, each chapter arrives in full force, each one in its own massive airship. Setting aside the ridiculousness of this, it raises a question the show never addresses. Most of these chapters are located in California, easily reachable by air. Why are they so ideologically distinct from Quintus's chapter? With all of the readily available aircraft, why doesn't Quintus or any other chapter enforce their command? Lay down the law and say, this is the orthodoxy, this is how we do things. In the games, geographic isolation is what causes the chapters to drift in doctrine. Chapters couldn't easily impose orthodoxy on one another across hundreds of miles of hostile wasteland. But in the show, they can fly to each other's doorstep. The thing that makes the Brotherhood's regional variation make sense doesn't exist in the show, and the writers never seem to realize. During the conclave, one of the elders asks,
"Where the hell is the Commonwealth, Quintus?"
I'm sorry, what? The Commonwealth Brotherhood is in Boston. Boston. That's over 2,300 miles away. Why would they be expected? How would they even get here? The show treats their absence as significant, as if the Commonwealth is some dominant power with influence on the Western chapters, when they're actually remnants of a distant Eastern expedition. My guess as to why they're even mentioned is that Fallout 4 is the most recent mainline game, and a large portion of the show's audience has only played that one. Name-dropping the Commonwealth gets that portion of the audience to react with a, "Ooh, I know that name," even if it makes no sense. A vertibird does eventually show up carrying a single Commonwealth representative, who apparently flew across the entire continent alone without refueling. The show treats this as completely normal. Let's take a closer look at the Commonwealth rep, shall we? Xander Harkness is an interesting character. Not because of anything to do with his actual character. He barely has one, and is in the show scarcely longer than an episode before he's killed off. What little we see of him is that he's a friendly, meat-headed paladin, who is also apparently a psychopath that smiles while lining up ghoul children against a wall to execute them. What is interesting about him is that he displays that the show is not only content in destroying pre-Bethesda lore, but is also happy to further muddy and mangle the already muddy and mangled Bethesda Fallout lore. No lore is safe from this show. Xander has flown out west for the cold fusion diode, the East Coast Brotherhood apparently needing it badly enough that without it they risk losing the Commonwealth entirely. What exactly are they fighting that cold fusion would help them with? It wouldn't be for Liberty Prime. The big guy has been activated twice before without it. Who could they be fighting? The Institute? The Railroad? The Minutemen? Yeah, actually, it's probably the Minutemen, all 10 of them with their funny hats. I understand that a limitless energy source is extremely useful, but having actually played Fallout 4, I can't figure out how cold fusion is going to win them whatever war they're fighting. What's funny is that the boxes of fusion cores shown earlier in the episode would be a clear and obvious boon to the East Coast Brotherhood, more power for their armor and weapons. Xander should have loaded his vertibird with those and gone home. Xander and Maximus have a couple conversations where Xander lays out his philosophy about the Brotherhood. He calls them a bulwark against chaos, and the last bastion of order in the country, telling Maximus,
"We're the Brotherhood of Steel! We keep the Wasteland safe!"
and that, if the Commonwealth falls, civilization won't last much longer. This is a jumbled mess of what different Brotherhood chapters believe across the games. The West Coast chapters were generally focused on the original mission, preserving technology and keeping it from being abused the way it was at Mariposa. The East Coast DC chapter under Elder Lyons broke from this, adopting a nation-building mission and constructing infrastructure like Project Purity. Then, in Fallout 4, the Capital Brotherhood moves to Boston to become the Commonwealth chapter, abandoning the nation-building to focus on destroying the Institute as an existential threat to mankind. Paladin Dance makes it clear that the Commonwealth chapter's mission is closer to the West Coast orthodoxy. Xander talking like they're still the old DC chapter trying to save the people of the Wasteland doesn't line up with any of this. The show smoothed all of it together into a single vague, protect the Wasteland mission for the Brotherhood as a whole. The if the Commonwealth falls, civilization won't last much longer line is also pretty funny on its own terms. The East Coast in Bethesda Fallouts has consistently been shown to be in significantly worse shape than the West Coast. Most people out east are still living in shacks in small isolated settlements, the largest of which are maybe a couple hundred people. There is nothing resembling a nation anywhere on the East Coast, in DC or Boston. Meanwhile, the West Coast has, well, had, before the show annihilated them off-screen, several large nations. The NCR and Caesar's Legion each control territory spanning the area of entire pre-war states. New Vegas as a city-state alone had more people and territory under its control than anything we see on the East Coast. If I had to be generous, I'd say maybe Xander is using the word civilization figuratively, because there sure as hell isn't much of it out east. I'm also pretty sure that during any of these conversations, the words Boston or Massachusetts are never said alongside the word Commonwealth. If they said Boston out loud, they'd be drawing attention to the fact that they're asking the audience to believe that a faction over 2,300 miles away is somehow relevant to a story set in California and Nevada. Like I said, the fans that like the show will perk up when they hear Commonwealth, and the people who have never played the games will just assume it's somewhere nearby, because there is no way anyone on the other side of the country can even reliably communicate cross-country in this world, let alone casually fly a vertibird over an entire continent. If I missed any dialogue that explicitly names Massachusetts alongside the Commonwealth, please let me know, because that would only make this worse. Going back to the Conclave, I have a question of my own to ask. Where the hell is the Mojave chapter? They should be pretty close by. Remember the Mojave chapter? The chapter that appears in the game that this season skinned and is using as a hand puppet? Father Elijah? Helios 1? Operation Sunburst? Nah, forget it. They also don't exist, right alongside the Lost Hills. The Conclave wraps up with a fight ring where Brotherhood knights beat each other up in their armor while everyone watches and cheers. Later, Maximus fights a man, and it ends with him stabbing him to death. These guys are like 2 steps removed from being raiders with power armor at this point. The Brotherhood's devolution from a knightly order into a rowdy fraternity is nearly complete. The writers seem genuinely confused or ignorant about what the Brotherhood is. The way they're portrayed here, they act less like the Brotherhood and more like a discount Space Marine chapter from 40k, or at least what the writers think a Space Marine chapter is like. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the reference point they were working from. The writers are such suckers for iconography that they see 2 groups in big power armor and decided to just make them the same thing. The look is what mattered to them, not anything resembling substance. Like Mr. House, the Brotherhood is a husk, but it doesn't end with just the Brotherhood. Oh no. The other factions get it worse, if you can believe it. The Brotherhood still exists, even if it's in this zombie form. Let's move on to other factions that were major players in the Wasteland, only to be reduced to atoms by the show. With the first and second seasons taking place in California and Nevada, you might be wondering, where is the NCR? The new California Republic controlled much of California and had a massive presence in the Mojave. So where are all the 2-headed bear flags and dusty troopers wishing for a nuclear winter?
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes it.
Well, the entirety of the NCR was wiped out, with most of it happening off-screen. The only part of this collapse we do see is the destruction of the nation's capital, Shady Sands. In the first season, it's simply said to have been nuked, while the second season gives us a little more detail. An NCR trooper, under the influence of one of the show's plot device mind control chips, drives a caravan wagon into the capital with a nuclear bomb hidden inside, leveling the city. This causes the entire nation to seemingly crumble into dust. All of the other cities and states that made up the NCR, the Hub, Redding, New Reno, Vault City, Junktown, Dayglow, the Boneyard, are never mentioned or addressed. The show doesn't care about them. The show probably doesn't even know they exist. Actually, the Boneyard doesn't exist anymore either. Or at least not how it appeared in Fallout 1. In that game, the Boneyard is the city built out of the ruins of Los Angeles. The show, for reasons that are never explained, retcons the location of Shady Sands to be in LA rather than the hundreds of miles north where it sat in Fallout 1. This is a massive change. In Fallout 1, Shady Sands is a new settlement, a city built in the wastes, founded by Vault 15 dwellers using a GECK. It's a symbol of humanity rebuilding from scratch, something new rising out of the nuclear ashes. Moving it to LA turns it into just another city built on old ruins, completely undercutting what it represented. This change also rewrites the story of the original Vault Dweller, who now apparently had to travel significantly further to reach Shady Sands when Vault 13 was only a couple days away in the original game. The show rewrites the geography of Fallout 1 without acknowledging it for a second. Okay, the NCR is wiped out in California. Does their presence in the Mojave fare any better? No, it doesn't. The entire NCR Mojave army is gone. Locations like Camp Gulf sit abandoned. During one of the credit animations, the NCR Mojave headquarters at Camp McCarran is shown in ruins, with the corpses and skeletons of NCR troopers scattered around. The only NCR presence we see for most part of the second season is a pair of old ragged troopers still in denial about the fact that their nation no longer exists. That is, until the very last episode, when a platoon of NCR troopers and a squad of rangers materializes out of nowhere to save Maximus from a Deathclaw. Their gear is clean and new looking. They even have a standard bearer holding a pristine flag. For 2 seasons, the show is adamant that the NCR is finished, and then these guys just spawn in like new units in an RTS game. It doesn't make any sense. The writers are clearly making this up as they go, tossing aside not only the lore of the games, but even the things they wrote themselves last season. Oh, and then there's the music in this scene. This is a minor point, but man is it annoying. When the NCR shows up to save Maximus, the Fallout 4 theme starts playing. Come on. The scene is set in Freeside, in Vegas, in the Mojave. You have an NCR Ranger firing an anti-material rifle, the most iconic armor and weapon combination in New Vegas, and you play the theme from a completely different game set on the other side of the continent. Why not play the New Vegas theme? It's just another example of the show catering to viewers who have only ever played Fallout 4. The people who would recognize the appropriate theme are exactly the people the show keeps disappointing, but I doubt they care. The destruction of the NCR is such a waste. They were a central part of the Fallout world going as far back as the first game, slowly taking shape into something resembling a modern nation, a post-apocalyptic country, showing that some kind of civilization could actually be rebuilt. New Vegas used them to ask whether a nation looking to pre-war America as its model would learn the lessons of the past or be doomed to repeat its mistakes. The NCR was a direct result of the player's actions stretching back to the very beginning. The Vault Dwellers saving Tandy and helping Aradesh in Fallout 1 is what plants the seeds of the nation. By Fallout 2, you can see those seeds growing, the once small town now a burgeoning city with electricity and roads. And your actions there further shape the NCR's growth into a major power. A statue of the Vault Dweller stands outside the NCR Hall of Congress. The plaque at its base reads, "To the stranger in Vault 13, what doesn't exist, we must sometimes dream, and let our dreams inspire us to greater heights." So it was with the stranger and his belief in the legend of Vault 13. All that is gone now, tossed aside by writers that didn't seem to care about any of it. And what of their main adversaries across the Colorado River? What about Caesar's Legion? They too have suffered severe off-screen damage, though not quite as fatal as the NCRs. Early in the second season, Lucy is captured by them and taken to their camp. Instead of immediately enslaving or crucifying her, they take her to their leader and let her ramble like a dipshit for way too long. After this, Legate McClunky Culkin explains to her, for no reason other than to exposit this to the audience, that the Legion is in a civil war. The original Caesar, Edward Sallow, has died, and now two factions of the Legion, each with its own pretender Caesar, are fighting over his corpse, which apparently has the name of his chosen successor written on a piece of paper. The corpse is sitting on a tiny hill between their two camps, the smallest no man's land in history, and I do mean tiny. The hill is like 10 feet tall and 20 across, and they have all these defenses and legionaries watching it. Considering Caesar's corpse is a desiccated skeleton at this point, they've been at this for a while. Am I supposed to take this seriously? It's honestly comical, almost a parody. Of course, in a less stupid world, which Fallout was not that long ago, a polity like the Legion would obviously have a succession plan. In New Vegas, the Courier can kill Caesar themselves, and the Legion doesn't immediately collapse. We can see this line of succession with characters like Legate Lanius taking over if Caesar is killed. Even NCR characters confirm the existence of a line of succession, and that Caesar's death won't stop their push into the Mojave. But no, Caesar died, and now the Legion is embroiled in the dumbest civil war in history. The Legion does crucify Lucy eventually, and later the Ghoul, TM, saves her, setting off explosions in the camp that get the two Legion sides fighting each other in full force. This happens in the third episode, and then because the writers were done using the Legion as jingling keys from mindless fans, and want to save them as a threat for the next season, the show forgets about them for 5 episodes. When they show up again in the finale, Legate McClunky Culkin is dragging Sallow's desiccated corpse past one of the dead pretender Caesars and into a tent. The note left by Sallow reads, "I am Caesar. I am the Legion. It ends with me." McClunky, apparently shocked by this, kills the random centurion who witnessed him reading it, and then swallows the note. Then he puts on Caesar's crown, walks out of the tent, and the remaining Legion just accepts him as their new leader. No questions asked. Important questions like, what did the note say? Who is the new Caesar? Forget it. Just don't think about it. He announces that they're going to claim New Vegas and build a Caesar's palace there. Ugh. And that's the Legion pretty much done for the season. The whole thing is ridiculous. Not only did the Legion demonstrably have a succession plan, but this is a man who conquered 87 tribes and forged them into a nation. To suggest that Caesar didn't want the Legion to outlive him doesn't make any sense. He expected the conquest of New Vegas and the Mojave to solidify his Legion into an empire. That was the entire point. But apparently no, he just did it for the funsies. Just a little haha joke, a lark. The show also portrays the Legion as little more than a marauding army, and not even a particularly impressive one. Just this one camp with two sides slapping each other over a hill. Nothing is mentioned about the vast territory the Legion controls on the other side of the Colorado and Arizona, or the 87 tribes absorbed under its banner. The Legion were a mirror to the NCR. Another large post-apocalyptic nation drawing inspiration from humanity's past, but inverted in values and methods. Another civilization potentially doomed to repeat the same mistakes as the world before the war, just in a different direction. That's what made them an interesting foil to the NCR. But instead, they're shrunk down, stripped of their territory, and reduced to a bunch of retards fighting over a corpse on a hill. Brilliant. What about New Vegas itself? How does the city these two factions were fighting over look in this supposedly canon show? Unsurprisingly, Vegas is also pretty much destroyed. As mentioned earlier, Mr. House is now a psycho freak AI man, so the city is in shambles. The strip is abandoned, its casinos boarded up, the streets dust covered and littered with wrecked cars. Despite all this, the power is still somehow on and the casino lights and neon are still glowing for no explained reason. Also, an entire pack of Deathclaws has taken up residence in the strip and is just chilling there. What do they eat? Despite being home to 10-foot-tall mutant super predator lizards, Freeside, right next door, still has a ton of people living in it. The gate to the strip is barred, and I guess that's enough to stop the Deathclaws from devouring everyone. You can see some familiar Freeside locations, the Silver Rush, the Atomic Wrangler, the King's School of Impersonation. Don't worry, I'll get to that last one. But these are mostly set dressing and little else. There's this one scene where Maximus, wearing the awful, terrible, disgusting-looking Ranger power armor, is walking down Freeside towards the strip. The locals are watching in awe, taking off their hats with one guy yelling, "Long live the New California Republic." The show again forgetting, or not caring, that Vegas wasn't part of the NCR, and that Freeside in particular didn't have much love for them, with regular tensions between Freesiders and NCR citizens. And also, come on, you killed the NCR show, you did that. You murdered it off screen with nearly every other faction in the setting, and now you want to have a reverent moment for them? Please. Spare me. During this lame march, the Ghoul TM says,
Never underestimate the power of brand recognition.
and isn't that just a perfect summary of this show? Familiar iconography flashed in the audience's face with the expectation that they'll cheer at the key jangling. The show wrote its own critique and put it in the mouth of one of its own characters. And often, they can't even get the basic visuals right. In episode 5, we get to see a lot of pre-war Vegas, including a wide shot of the Strip. From this shot, we can see that Gamora and the Tops have switched places from their in-game locations. Some might say that this is a small thing, but that's exactly my point. This was easy. You have an entire game with the Strip laid out in full 3D. You couldn't even turn the game on for 5 minutes and check where the buildings go? There's no plot reason for the casinos to have swapped positions. This isn't a case of artistic liberty in service of the story, they just didn't care enough to double check. In this flashback, as the Ghoul TM pulls up to the Lucky 38, he notices Vault 21 as a pre-war hotel in the background, his wife noting that his ad campaign has been an enormous success. Except that Vault 21 wasn't a pre-war hotel. It was a standard vault with an experiment like many of the others. The inhabitants had to resolve their conflicts through gambling, fitting for a Vegas vault. It successfully protected its residents through the war, and was only converted into a hotel years later. Mr. House challenged the residents to a game of blackjack for ownership of the vault, won, and had the lower levels filled with concrete while repurposing the upper floors as a hotel for the Strip. Again, this is an easy thing to double check in the game. The lady running the hotel will tell you all of this if you ask her. It takes 5 minutes. But now Vault 21 was a pre-war hotel despite the game showing the complete opposite. If the show can't even get these small, easy visual references right, the things that would have taken the least effort and shown even a token amount of care, what hope was there for the bigger stuff? Why do this to the West Coast? Why take nearly every faction that exists there and destroy them, wiping them off the map? If I had to guess, I think that the writers, like Bethesda with their Fallouts, are really attached to the idea of the untamed wasteland. They want their characters exploring a lawless waste, full of raiders, mutant creatures, and ramshackle settlements. And despite the games managing to do that exactly while keeping large factions intact, the show writers decided otherwise. So, goodbye NCR, goodbye Legion, goodbye New Vegas. Off to the dumpster you go. What's crazy is that if they wanted a wild, rugged wasteland adventure with no major factions in the way, the East Coast was right there. The East Coast, as seen in the Bethesda Fallouts, is just what this show wants. No massive factions, small scattered settlements, and filled with threats from raiders, super mutants, creatures, you name it. They had a setting that already fit what they wanted to make. Instead, they took a torch to the West Coast, effectively resetting it to a pre-Fallout 1 state, and did most of it off-screen with a hand wave. 3 games worth of lore and world building just flushed away. And yet one faction survived the culling just fine. The Brotherhood of Steel, stronger than ever in fact. Every chapter has its own airship, hundreds or thousands of members, more than enough power armor to go around. The show has the same obsession with the Brotherhood that the Bethesda games do. They show up as a major faction in every single Bethesda Fallout regardless of where it's set, and the show is happy to follow suit. No longer just one faction among many, they are now the dominant power in the Wasteland. Pretty much the only faction left standing, until the Enclave magically shows up next season. Once upon a time, the Fallout setting was full of competing powers, ideologies, and nations asking what kind of future humanity would build for itself. Now it's the Brotherhood and a bunch of rubble. How depressing. I want to talk about another group of people that aren't quite a faction, but have a long and important history in the games. The Vault Dwellers. The Dwellers are an interesting bunch. Many of the player characters across the games have been Dwellers, and they've done a lot of good. The Vault Dweller from Vault 13 defeated the Master and his mutant army, the Unity. His descendant, the Chosen One, stopped the Enclave from genociding the Wasteland and destroyed their oil rig base. The Lone Wanderer helped the East Coast Brotherhood and activated Project Purity, giving the capital Wasteland clean drinking water. Even non-player Dwellers have done well. Vault 15 Dwellers founded Shady Sands, which became the NCR. Vault City was built by Vault 8 and became a successful independent city. Vault 81 is still active 200 years later, keeping its residents safe while trading with the outside world. The point is that the Vault Dwellers were capable people. Much of the misfortune we see befall them in the games comes not from their own failings, but from the unethical Vault-Tec experiments being conducted on them without their knowledge. Vault 11, for example, forced its residents to sacrifice one of their own every year under the threat of total extermination. The threat was false, but the attempt to resist it caused the vault to collapse into violence. Only 5 survived, and none of them made it out into the Wasteland, choosing to end it all instead of living with their shame. Dwellers were normal people, with all of the virtues and flaws that come with being human. Some were smart, some were dumb, some were good, some were evil. Many were naive about how Wasteland society worked, but they were not hopeless, clueless fools. So of course the show portrays them as hopeless, clueless fools. Actually, that's being generous. The show's dwellers are chronically, catastrophically dumb. The vaults in the show are newly created vaults 31, 32, and 33, all connected to one another through a tunnel system. Whenever the show cut back to the vault subplots, I would groan, because they involve some of the most feckless morons ever written, engaging in the most pointless storylines ever. The best example of this is Reg. I despise this character. Whenever he's on screen, I want to die. Reg is a product of inbreeding. And no, that is not a joke about his intelligence. His parents were actually related, and this is a significant part of his character. He does have a sub-brick level IQ though. In the second season, this king of the window lickers wanders the vault aimlessly while the overseer is dealing with the crisis of a broken water chip. Wanting him out of her hair, she suggests he start a club. So he starts the Products of Inbreeding Support Group. Yes, this is an actual plotline in the show. They spent money on this. Later, when his group's water usage during rationing gets him a telling off from the overseer, he refuses to change anything, walks past her, and she just stands there like a lemon and lets him. Vault overseers across the games have been presented as having near dictatorial authority over their residents. This one just watches Reg waddle away. Later, she shows up to his group meeting with Vault security armed and ready to crack heads. They have a pointless back and forth, with Reg acting like an exceptional individual, and the overseer doing nothing but listening to his jabbering. Just arrest the idiot, break up his little gaggle of dumbasses, and be done with it. The fact that this subplot exists at all, let alone takes up so much screen time, is frustrating beyond belief. The second Vault storyline involves Steph, the one-eyed, eye-patch-wearing overseer of Vault 32, who has a dark secret. Not only is she evil, she's also Canadian. But I repeat myself. Her husband-to-be grows suspicious and finds evidence that she killed someone, along with a hidden Canadian ID card she kept for some reason. Why would she keep something like that? Oh, because the plot needed her to. Once exposed as a disgusting Canadian, she pulls out a special Pip-Boy and contacts the Enclave, setting up their arrival next season. This is a time filler plot, dressed up with a cliffhanger at the end to give it a point. In Vault 31, Lucy's brother Norm deals with being locked in the vault with supplies running out. This vault is like Vault 111 from Fallout 4, and all of the residents are cryogenically frozen. Norm unfreezes a bunch of these people, and demonstrating that he might be the only vault dweller in the show with more than 2 brain cells to rub together, pretends to work for Vault Tech and recruits them, and they escape through a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. The rest of Norm's plotline is another time filler that amounts to very little and is not worth covering in any more detail. More interesting than his plot is how apparently the vault's ventilation system leads to giant man-sized vents on the surface, completely defeating the point of a vault. Are you telling me that raiders or, super mutants could just crawl in these massive back doors and get inside the vault? Okay, I have to talk about the location of these vaults and how they essentially soft retcon Fallout 1 whether the writers realize it or not. One of the Master's primary goals in Fallout 1 was to find vaults and kidnap their residents. He needed prime normals, humans sheltered from the radioactive wasteland, as subjects to be exposed to FEV and converted into super mutants, which he believed to be the perfect species to inherit the Earth. Vaults were the ideal source. Super mutants were sent out specifically to locate them, and one of the bad endings of Fallout 1 involves revealing the location of Vault 13 to the Lieutenant. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 are located in Santa Monica, in Los Angeles County. Here is a map of Fallout 1. The Boneyard, the ruins of Los Angeles, is here. South of that is the Cathedral, the headquarters of the Master and his entire operation. Santa Monica is roughly here, a stone's throw from the Cathedral. So the super genius Master and his army, whose entire mission it was to find vaults, somehow missed a trio of them sitting less than 50 miles from his front door. Is he stupid? Well, maybe they were extremely well hidden. Buried deep underground, perhaps, or concealed inside other structures? Nope. Vault 33's entrance sits on the surface, its massive door right there in the open. And the Master just missed it. Oopsie daisy. The writers either didn't know this or didn't care. And the result is a location choice that effectively ignores one of the central plot points of the first game in the series. The same game whose world they've been pillaging for iconography since episode 1. Now, one can attempt to twist themselves into pretzels to find a way to fit this round peg into a square hole, or can admit that the writers didn't care and just did something that effectively ignores or even undoes the events of Fallout 1. The Vault plotlines make the Dwellers clueless morons, hopeless wretches that act like adult children that have trouble dressing themselves in the morning, which is a complete inversion of how they've been portrayed across the games. They're also pointless filler that introduces massive lore contradictions with the Master that ripples downstream through everything that follows. And they do none of it in service of any character or story worth caring about. These plots damage the lore, waste the screen time, and accomplish nothing. The mischaracterization of Mr. House in the Brotherhood of Steel, the annihilation of the NCR, Caesar's Legion in New Vegas, the debasement of the Vault Dwellers, and the apathy toward the lore of Fallout 1. These are the most significant examples of the show's disregard for pre-established characters and the events of the games. The show happily takes these things, scoops out all the substance and history, and replaces it with whatever it wants regardless of whether it makes any sense for the character or faction. They see someone like Mr. House, with an established personality, and lobotomize him while keeping the bare minimum of his surface level appearance. Or, in the case of the NCR and the Legion, they wipe them out entirely, sweep them off the table without a moment's consideration for what that does to the world that existed long before they started writing for it. The writers don't seem to have considered that they inherited a world with a history. Faithfulness never even crossed their minds. They were not going to write a story that served the Fallout universe, adding another chapter to a mythos that could sit alongside the games. They were going to write their story, and damned if they would let the Fallout lore get in their way. But there is a lower level of treatment than what these characters and factions were subjected to. Below even the lobotomy and off-screen erasure sits something more dismissive still, the purely cosmetic reference. People and places used for nothing more than a visual nod, something for vapid fans to notice in the background while the show gets on with its own business. No substance or respect for what these things actually were, just the look, maybe the name, stripped of everything else, and left on screen just long enough to register. The most blatant example of this rotten kind of pandering is one of the first scenes of Season 2. It opens with a wide shot of Novac, the settlement from New Vegas built around its motel and giant T-Rex statue. Maybe we'll see Nobark Noonan, or Manny, or any of the other characters that live there. No. Like most of the Mojave, Novac is a ghost town, abandoned. It's only being used right now because it's something people will recognize. But they can't even get that right. The T-Rex statue, which in the game was facing towards the highway because it was designed to draw travelers in to stop, is inexplicably facing toward the motel. Why? Oh, because Lucy is going to use it as a sniping spot, and the fight takes place in the motel area, so the 50-foot statue has apparently spun 180 degrees since New Vegas. The residents are gone, and in their place, the great Khans have occupied the town and are about to hang the Ghoul TM. Don't get excited, the Ghoul TM survives and none of the Khan characters are from the game. These Khans just exist to be shot at. The show is just using their name and some of their symbols as a lazy reference, and to any viewer who hasn't played the games, these are just another flavor of Raider, which is exactly how the plot treats them. For easily impressed fans, they'll perk up at the name and the iconography despite there being nothing behind it. A fight breaks out and the Ghoul TM gets free and Big Iron by Marty Robbins starts playing. The song is one of the most famous tracks associated with New Vegas, and that's the only reason it's here. To normies watching this, it's just a Western song, but to the Cargo Cult fans, it'll get a reaction regardless of context. Big Iron is a song about an Old West duel between an outlaw and an Arizona ranger. A ranger with a big iron on his hip, that is to say, a big-ass revolver. The Ghoul, TM, whose signature weapon is a custom revolver that he carries throughout both seasons, does not use it in this fight. The one scene in the entire show where it would have been perfect having the Ghoul TM draw his revolver, and the show doesn't do it. How do you mess this up so badly? This whole scene exists to open the season with a low-stakes action sequence that has no plot purpose and no connection to anything that follows. Novac and the Khans are stripped and sacrificed as backdrop to act as this pointless scene's key jangle. Do you remember the Kings? They were a neat little faction. A gang of Elvis impersonators fit just right in a game taking place in Vegas. But New Vegas did something interesting with the concept. It played with the idea of how people centuries removed from the context would relate to something like a school of Elvis impersonation, treating him as a kind of paragon worth emulating, and building an identity around that imitation. The Kings used that identity to keep some semblance of order and peace in Freeside. Despite their good intentions and some decent outcomes, they ultimately were just guys in costumes armed with pistols and knives, outmatched and at the mercy of the larger factions in the Mojave. Many of their endings have them slaughtered to a man. The Kings added some nice flavor to New Vegas, and the game didn't use them simply as a visual gag. They had quests, conversations, and connections to the world. You could learn why they did what they did. There was substance behind the jailhouse rocker costumes. Their portrayal in the show is roughly on the same level as the cons. The Ghoul, TM, and Lucy approach the entrance to the strip, where the Ghoul, TM, spots ghoulified kings through his spyglass, standing around doing Elvis mannerisms even as feral ghouls. He suggests they take a different route. Lucy, currently high on buff out, insists they just walk straight in. Lucy, being the witless moron she is, approaches the clearly feral kings, growling, twitching, doing the whole zombie routine, and tries to talk to them. One lunges at her and she blows its leg off, which kicks off another stakes-free fight scene as she blasts through the ghoulified kings while another oldies track plays over the carnage. It ends with a gratuitous slow-motion shot of a bullet flying into the back of the last ghoul's head and popping out of his forehead. From the jacket, you can clearly tell that this is meant to be the king himself. And that's it. That's the end of the kings. For the normies who don't know the games, it was another wacky fight scene where protagonists shoot zombies. For the brain-dead fans, they were probably losing their minds. Oh my god, the kings, I recognize them. Convinced that the reference was good because it existed. I wonder if you asked one of them to articulate why they thought it was good, whether they could say anything beyond, well, the season is set in Vegas, and the kings were in New Vegas, so the reference makes sense. Pattern recognition is seemingly enough for them. And pattern recognition is the best way to describe this other scene earlier in the season. When the Ghoul, TM, has to save Lucy from the Legion, he realizes he needs help. So he heads to Camp Golf, which was one of the NCR's main bases in the Mojave. The question is, why would he come here? The camp itself is clearly abandoned, and the NCR has been toast for years. The Ghoul, TM, knows this. What kind of help was he expecting to find here? Don't worry, the script has him covered. As he wanders around the resort building, a Securitron comes to life. And not just any Securitron, it's Victor from New Vegas. Why is Victor at Camp Golf? Oh, whatever. His entire purpose in the show is to tell the Ghoul, TM, that there are some NCR soldiers hiding in the hills. How does Victor know this? Listen, the plot needs him to know this, so he does. Information delivered, Victor's role in the show is essentially finished. He appears once more for about 15 seconds in a pre-war flashback, and that's it. The show needed the Ghoul, TM, to learn about the NCR soldiers. Rather than write a clever or even coherent way for him to find out, they sent him to a location he would know is abandoned, had a fan-recognized character materialize out of nowhere to hand him the information, and moved on. Victor is only here because people will recognize him. Pattern recognition. Blatant iconography. These are all examples of the show snatching iconography from the games and using it as a backdrop. Jingling keys for easy claps from the easily impressed while not getting in the way of how they want to tell their story. A story that doesn't really care about the Fallout world. And what's funny is that there are a lot of people out there, people who would consider themselves Fallout fans, who think this kind of lazy visual referencing is great. Ask them what they like about Fallout, and they'll say something like, I love the Brotherhood. Ask them why, and they'll tell you they love power armor, they love Ad Victorium, the logo, that's it. The most surface level stuff. No mention of gameplay or quests. The show is made for fans like this. Now, some might push back and say, in a video about adaptation faithfulness, surely the visuals matter. The show should look like the games. And I agree, it should. But there's a reason I'm not giving the show any credit for getting the visuals right. It was the easy part. When a novel is adapted into a visual medium, there's craft involved in taking written descriptions of characters, places, and items and translating them onto the screen. Artistic liberties happen, and you can have a discussion about whether those choices served or undermined the source. The Fallout show is adapting from a series with 4 main entries and 2 spin-offs spread across nearly 30 years, all of which are packed with visuals to reference. Weapons, armor, creatures, locations, all of it already designed and sitting there. Adapting the visuals was the part that was practically done for them. Just make the show look like the games. I'm not giving points for meeting the bare minimum. The vault suits look like the games? Yeah, they better. Congratulations, you did what was expected of you. The only conversation to be had about the visuals is whether you like what they chose to pull from each game. Do you prefer the Fallout 4 style vault suits over the 3 New Vegas style? That comes down to taste, and that argument ends up going nowhere fast. Except for this. This thing is horrible. That is objective truth. Why would they make this? So yes, the costumes look nice. The props are neat. The power armor and Securitrons being practical effects is really cool. but that's the bare minimum, and you don't get points for that. After all this, I think it's fair to say that the Fallout show makes changes to the lore and history of the world so severe and so careless that they cannot be explained as creative reinterpretation. These are not little changes or adjustments made to better serve the story as a TV show or to smooth the transition from game to screen. These are massive breaks from the source material that change, damage, and destroy so much with so little care. Take the Ghoul juice. In the show, the Ghoul, TM, uses an inhaler to imbibe a drug that prevents him from going feral. Now, ghouls have changed in appearance across the series, and the games are inconsistent if they even need food or water. But never, never ever has it been established that ghouls need to take a drug to stop themselves going feral. Across the games, the players encounter several ghouls who have been alive since before the Great War, over 200 years, who are still mentally sound. None of them take a drug to stay this way. Why would the writers add this to the setting? It doesn't contribute to the story very much, but what it does do is retroactively damage the world. Does every ghoul need this drug, or just the Ghoul TM? The Ghoul TM starts to go feral in about 12 hours without the drug. Did ghouls always need it? How do they obtain it regularly? What even is it? How is it made? It adds all these questions and creates confusion with existing lore for no payoff. It's a change that costs the setting a lot, and yet buys the show very little. And that example points to the show's broader misunderstanding of what Fallout actually is about. The Fallout games are post-apocalyptic and post-post-apocalyptic stories. They're about the world after the end of the world, how humanity moves on from near extinction, how the species attempts to rebuild, whether we learn the lessons of the war that almost destroyed us, or whether we are doomed to repeat them. But the show seems far more preoccupied with the pre-war. Huge chunks of screen time are dedicated to pre-war flashbacks. So many of the characters are pre-war figures still wandering around 200 years later. The show is obsessed with the past, with the lead up to the Great War, with who started it and how, treating those questions as urgent and important when they are not. The pre-war is relevant as a ghost, as a shadow cast over the present. The games know this. They touch on how this ghost can haunt the present, use it, and then move on, because they understood that the past is past, and that it's the people alive now who will determine what comes next. This obsession over the causes of the war is a distraction from the focus of the Wasteland and the people living in it now. The Fallout 2 intro put it simply. The end of the world occurred pretty much as we had predicted. Too many humans, not enough space or resources to go around. The details are trivial and pointless. The reasons, as always, purely human ones. But apparently the show needs to drag the pre-war storyline across 3 seasons because the writers found it more interesting than the main setting of the series. How can this reckless lack of respect and understanding for the source be explained? The simple explanation is incompetence. The people that made the show were bad at their jobs. This was the best they could do, the limit of what they were capable of creating. Another way to go would be apathy. They just don't care. Fallout means nothing to them, it's just another job, and they wanted to get it done and move on. But I don't think either of those is enough to explain it. I think it was malicious. I think they did it on purpose. If you asked me to utterly destroy the Fallout setting and lore, the show would look pretty close to what I'd come up with. The West Coast is annihilated. 3 games worth of build-up gone. The East Coast lore we do see isn't treated much better. The tone of the world that once took itself seriously while still having moments of levity is replaced with gonzo nonsense and characters acting stupid for the needs of the plot. People, places, and factions are used as lazy, cheap visual references and then thrown into the dumpster. It's wild how badly the setting is mangled in the wake of the show. Look at the wiki entries for locations and characters. Their history before reads as rich and detailed, and their post-show entry is just, they're dead and gone and left in ruins. The show is like a tornado, ripping through the lore and leaving splinters in its path. I can't help but think that this was a purposeful desecration. They wanted to create their story and characters, and didn't want the Fallout world getting in the way, willing to bend and break anything in service of their own creations at the expense of the source. Now, I can never say this for certain. I can't give you proof of this from the showrunners. They might say in interviews that they love the setting, that they care about doing it justice, and I can only take them at their word. I don't have a crystal ball to look into their hearts and see if their words match their thoughts. But what I do have is the product they created. I can examine the show and what it contains, how it treats the source material, and the show tells me that they don't care about adapting Fallout faithfully. It would take a lot to convince me otherwise, given how thoroughly the show appears to hate the setting it's supposedly celebrating. You would hope that people who claim to love something would handle it better than this. But maybe it's not so surprising. Like Bethesda before them, the showrunners did not create Fallout. They are standing on the work of more talented people from decades ago who built this universe and established its tone, themes, factions, and history. Neither Bethesda or the showrunners seem to feel any obligation to treat that foundation with reverence. They don't understand Fallout because they don't care about it. And they don't care about it because they didn't make it. They have no respect for what came before and what made the series so worthwhile. Faithfulness never mattered to them, and as a result, the show was doomed from the start. Even after all of this, some will ask, why does it matter? Lore changes all the time. It's a series with mutants and ghouls. What does it matter? Do you expect them to just tell the story of the games again? To the first point, massive lore changes hurt investment into the plot. If there are no rules, if the history and laws of the world can change whenever it's convenient for the writers, there are no stakes. If the writers can invent whatever they need to save the heroes at any given moment, why should the audience care about the situations those heroes get into? If the world the adaptation presents bears no resemblance to the source, why watch it? Why create it in the first place? At that point, make your own setting. If the label says Fallout, but the contents are completely different, what was the point of the label? Skilled writers can acknowledge the lore of a world and craft interesting stories with stakes without breaking or ignoring what made the world engaging in the first place. This is the challenge of writing an adaptation. To the second point, yes, consistency, even in a fictional world, matters. Forgive me as I use one of those video essay words, but I want verisimilitude. I want internal cohesion. This wraps into the first point. If the world is not consistent, if things can change at the whim of the writer without regard to established lore, how can the audience care about the world? Fantastical elements in a story is not an excuse for anything to happen or for the plot to be nonsense. If ghouls in Fallout have been understood to behave a certain way across several games, and then an anti-feral ghoul juice is suddenly introduced, adding new rules that retroactively affect everything that came before, the investment in the world is damaged. Fictional universes have rules, and a good writer finds a way to respect and fit into those rules. To the third point, why would faithfully retelling the story of one of the games be a bad thing? Isn't that what you want from an adaptation? If you heard that a novel was being adapted into a TV show, but that it wasn't going to follow the story of the novel, you'd consider that strange. Why adapt it if you're going to tell a different story than the one from the book? But with video game adaptations, it's somehow expected it will be a different story from the games. That faithfully adapting the source material is the same as just wanting to see the game again, as if that would be so wrong. A well-written, faithful adaptation of Fallout 1 could make for a great season of television. The plot is already there. You just need a capable writer to adapt it. And then there's the simplest question. Why do you care? Because I want things to be good. I want games and TV shows based on games to be of quality. And criticism is how things get better. Don't settle for crap. Have higher standards for the things you consume. These things are not gifts from the heavens. They are products sold to you in exchange for your hard-earned cash, and you should want them to be great. I'm not going to just swallow something as terrible as the Fallout show because it's draped in iconography I recognize. And neither should you. And after all of this, I can say with certainty that the Fallout show totally fails to understand and respect what Fallout is. That failure is born from a malicious disregard for the source material, visible in the blatant destruction of entire games' worth of lore. It takes familiar sites from the games and uses them for cheap recognition, while hollowing out others and puppeteering them as skin suits devoid of the substance that made them interesting. It shows no regard for established lore, bulldozing it to make room for its own awful characters and plots. The Fallout show is not a faithful adaptation, and from its inception, it never wanted to be one. Well, that was fun. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's very much appreciated. In addition to the videos, I also stream here and on Twitch 4 times a week, and have a stream archive channel where you can check out my past streams. I've been looking forward to making this video for a while, and I'm glad to finally get my thoughts out on the Fallout show. It was a particularly rotten piece of media to sit through as a fan of the series. I felt like I was going crazy seeing people claim that it was the most faithful adaptation. What show were you watching? Anyway, can't wait for Season 3. It's a guaranteed catastrophe. Looking forward to the pointless war between the Moron Legion and the magic respawning NCR. Also, the Enclave will show up to be evil before exploding at the end of the season. Maybe they'll make it into Season 4 before being wiped out. Do you think there'll be a Season 4? I think it'll get a 4th season and fizzle out. As soon as Walton Goggins gets tired of sitting in the makeup chair for 4 hours, the show is done. The Ghoul, TM, is the only character that has any cultural staying power. Like, who really gives a shit about Lucy or Maximus? I despise the Ghoul, TM, by the way. He is someone's annoying, overpowered OC from a bad piece of fanfiction. He's pre-war and he's personally met half the important people in the setting. He's met Mr. House and the President. He was a famous actor. He was a soldier in Alaska and personally witnessed a Deathclaw there. He's a ghoul, but he's not that ugly. And he has a super cool custom exploding revolver and cannot die from anything up to and including being impaled on a light post. This character is so boring. Anytime he's on screen, I just don't care because there's no chances he loses or suffers any real setback for more than an episode. Boring, boring, boring. Usually, I like to recommend other things you should engage with instead of whatever I've just spent an hour tearing apart, but I don't watch that much TV. I mostly rewatch shows that are 20 to 30 years old, like The X-Files or Deep Space Nine or House MD, all of which are great and you should watch them if you haven't. But I do play a lot of video games. So here are some that I've played recently that are all better uses of your time than the Fallout show. Mina the Hollower is an amazing game from the Shovel Knight devs that combines Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, and a little bit of Bloodborne. It can be tough, but it is so satisfying finally beating a boss or platforming challenge, and the world is packed with details and secrets to uncover. Probably my favorite game of the year. Cairn is an atmospheric climbing game where you have to use precise control of your limbs to keep your balance while managing your stamina, hunger, thirst, and temperature as you scale to the summit of a treacherous mountain. Tainted Grail: Fall of Avalon is a first-person RPG set in a dark fantasy reimagining of Arthurian legend, with a twisted world to explore and plenty of ways to build your character. These are all good games that you should play. There is still good media being made. Play those, watch those, don't waste your time with crap like the Fallout show. That's it. I'm done. Thank you again for watching.